Hi there, and welcome to Bank or Not to Bank. That is the question. We're going to answer it today using these two board games. Real quick, before we start, you don't need to have these games to play. You don't have to have them on hand, that is, in order to learn from today's videos. We're just going to use these for demonstration purposes. And the second thing is bank, not bank, sounds technical. We're going to keep it simple, simple enough that we can just use two games to do this. So the first game is HODL UP. This game has a theme based on Bitcoin, and there is no banker. If one of the players decided to get up and go get a snack, when they came back, they could just pick up and keep on playing. Whereas with Monopoly, if the banker gets up and goes get a snack, then the game is basically paralyzed. Who's going to give out the money when you pass go? Who's going to take the money for the properties? Almost all the transactions in this game involve the banker. So those are the two games, and now let's jump right in. You have been invited over to the family. The name of the family is the Bigs, and Big Brother has claimed to be the banker for the game. Some of the other people in the family include Big Defense, Big Tech, Big Farm, and Big Banks. So all is going well until Big Banks lands on a hotel and doesn't have enough money to pay. So you're expecting him to have to mortgage and do something with something he owns, mortgage it, and potentially even go bankrupt and be out of the game because those are the rules that you're playing them by. But it turns out the Big family has some house rules, and the number one rule they have is too big to fail. So you watch incredulously, as Big Brother gives Big Banks extra money. Just gives it. Not even a loan, just gives it. So, turns out there's another house rule too, and that is that the bank can never go bankrupt. The bank can never run out of money. So, you notice this when Big Brother runs out of paper money during the game and starts to make handwritten IOUs to the other players. So, this is pretty frustrating. After a few rounds, you realize you can't win with those house rules. And if you complain about the banker, no one's going to do anything. Big Brother's not going to do anything about that. If you complain to the other bigs, Big Defense, Big Tech, Big Farm, Big Banks, they're not going to do anything. So the bottom line is you're not going to be able to win. You're not going to have fun because when you're in the big house, you're playing with their rules and there's nothing you can do about it. Let's say that you were put in charge of redesigning the money game. How would that work? So if you watch the other video that we have on hard money, basically money that no one can mess with, that's probably what you would want. You would want something where the big brother can't just decide who's going to get money and the bank could actually run out of money. Those sound like pretty good things. So the process of what your money would be like if you could redesign the money game, you would want immutable hard money. But here's another question then. Who's going to run it? Because whoever runs it, everybody else has to trust. You probably don't trust any of the Biggs family to run that. And another question is, who gets to decide who runs it? So there's some interesting questions that pop up, but let's keep going with this. So let's just approach this systematically. So what would be the simplest solution that we could do with this? And one question I would have is, could we go back to a gold standard? So technically, everyone in the world, if we all decided we wanted to do that, and everybody in all future generations said they wanted to do it, yeah, technically. But there's a reason why we're not on a gold standard today, and it has to do with physics. Gold is heavy. It costs a lot to mine it and get it out of the ground. You have to have trucks and people and all kinds of equipment to get it out. And you need fuel. You're going to transport it. When you get it out, you're going to have to refine it. You're going to have to melt it down. You're going to test it. And then you're going to need places to store it to keep it safe. So now you're going to pay for a bank, or you're going to have to pay for security. And so This is why we ended up with paper representations of what was money. But what really seals the deal for gold is technology. So, specifically the telegraph. With the telegraph, we could essentially, as humans, do transactions globally in near real time. But that physical element, the real heavy nature of gold, makes it really slow. So the actual settlement, I can make a deal with somebody in another part of the world, but to actually get them their gold or vice versa, that took a long time. So there's a disconnect. And if you heard of something called a honeypot, it means there's a target. So let's say you're a hacker and some company or organization has a really giant database. You're going to try really hard to get in there versus somebody who doesn't have a lot. So when Executive Order 6102 came out, they didn't have to go after every household. They didn't have to search every household to get every coin, every piece of gold that was out there. All they had to do was go to the honeypots, which were the physical banks, because gold physically is hard to move. People want to secure it in a safe location. So with Executive Order 6102, you could just, you know where the banks are, and you can go send people to go to it. So essentially, option number one of going back to a gold standard is a no-go because of physics. All right, you're still in charge of redesigning the money game. So what is option two? So what if we could find a political leader or central planner who we could actually trust? Well, I know I'm not going to trust Big Brother. I don't think you would trust any of the other bigs. But what about you? Would you want it, or would you just resign? So the answer is, in the short term, you might be able to find a leader of character who has the backbone and the capability to actually use a gold standard and keep sound money. But history tells us that that is not how things will turn out. In fact, every time when you look at the long-term view, human nature and incentives take over and we debase the money. So let's just look at why that is, because if you look at it this way, I think you'll see pretty clearly why this happens. Okay, so let's say that you were a leader, or it could be any leader. Let's say there's a leader and you want to raise money to pay for something. So one option, you can plunder from other countries. So you might be thinking that those days are behind us. If you would read Hidden Repression by Alex Gladstein, I think you would be shocked to see that actually this is still technically possible in today's world. So what would be another thing that would be more moral to do? Well, you could tighten the budget. You could cut your spending. So why would you not do that if you're a political leader? Well, the reason you wouldn't do that is because you probably wouldn't get elected, or you probably wouldn't get reelected if you're the one that cuts somebody else's perceived benefits. All right, what else could you do? We're just going to keep building out our decision tree here. So one thing you could do is you can get people to donate. An example of this is war bonds. Let's go to World War I in England, and you don't have enough money to fund the upcoming war. And you know that taxes are not going to be popular. So you do war bonds. So it turns out, and this was revealed more recently, that they told the public that the war bonds and the effort to raise funds was successful. That is not actually what happened. What they did is they issued more notes than they actually had gold. This is fractional banking. You basically are hoping from a time perspective that not everybody comes back to get their money at the same time. So if not everybody's running to the bank to get their gold, and you've promised more people that you actually have it, then it looks like you've increased the money supply. But it's not real. It's not based on what's actually there. So long term, that doesn't work. Okay, you could raise taxes on your own people. So this might kill the incentive to work, but technically, if you're the government, you can do this. What else can you do? Well, you can hope for a miracle. Maybe we develop some technology that is so revolutionary that nobody ever has to work again and all of our needs are met. So you could hope for a miracle. But then here's here's a different way you could do it. It's a sneaky way. You could quietly steal from everyone in their future by just increasing the money supply. This is called inflation, not pricing inflation, but monetary inflation. And if you look at what's going on in the US anyways, look at how we continue to increase the money supply and look at doesn't matter which party it is. So as you look at these options, plundering probably not the most moral thing to do, and if people find out about it, they're not going to be happy with you. Tightening your budget, you're going to get kicked out of office. Asking people to donate, they're not going to do it. Increasing their taxes, not interested. Hoping for a miracle, not really the best strategy. But what could you do? You could debase your money. And if enough people don't understand what's happening to them and you do it slowly enough, maybe it's 2% a year. If you debase your money slowly enough over time, maybe people won't notice. And you make short-term promises, get reelected, and then people in the future are stuck with the bill. And this is why, over time, eventually, everyone will debase the money. So this option is also off the table. All right, let's go on to the next option. What if we created something that had the benefits of the hard money, like gold, but it was digital? A digital gold. Well, this is a great idea because you have the benefits of the hard money, but you have the speed of transactions, where the speed of transactions and the speed of the settlement are both lightning fast. Thank you, Lynn Alden, for this amazing framework. But there's a couple stories to share. So the first story is sad, but it's true. This was already tried. It was called e-gold. And e-gold were 100% backed by gold. So they took real gold and they said, here's your digital token that represents that gold. It turns out Big Brother does not like losing control. The self-preservation of the deep state will kick in and it'll shut down the on and off ramps. In this case, they legally went after the company and they shut it down. Another story, just a more recent one. It's happening today with Custodia Bank. They had a proposal. They had an application to get a Fed Master account. They had a plan to back every dollar with $1.08 in cash. So they were over collateralized. But they, because they were in Bitcoin, were deemed too risky. Meanwhile, banks using fractional reserves don't have enough money to pay for their obligation. They are approved for a Fed Master account. So it's really disturbing. But the bottom line is option number 3 is off the table. We can't have a digital gold because as long as the on and off ramps are controlled by the government, they're just going to shut it down. Okay, there's a reason that we're going through these different options because it's leading us, these questions are leading us somewhere. So where it is leading us is we have two problems if we're going to redesign money. Number one, it needs to be something where nobody will be tempted. So no one has control, therefore no one could be tempted to debase the currency. That's number one. Number two is it also has to be something where you don't have one throat to choke. You don't have that honeypot where one entity or a small number of entities can be threatened or hacked. And where that's leading us to is option number 4, no bank. Okay, so for the no bank option, we're going to look at HODL UP. So in HODL UP, everybody plays voluntarily. It's not one of these things where you're being forced to play it. And in real life, that's how Bitcoin works. Nobody is forced to do it. However, the game is open to anyone. It doesn't matter if you're Big Brother, big banks, big defense, big enemies. It doesn't matter. It's free and open source. The way this works is the code is voluntarily run by anybody who wants to run the node. It's voluntary. You can't force them to. You also can't stop anybody from doing it. It's like the flip side. So let's take the fiat world. U.S. decides to punish Russia, and they use the SWIFT. System to basically freeze their funds, their treasuries. That's an attack from their point of view because they had U.S. dollars and the system could be used against them. So if if Russia decides they want to have Bitcoin, nobody can stop them. You can't do the equivalent of a swift attack if you're playing with Bitcoin. So it's voluntary. Anybody can do it, and you can't stop anybody, not even your enemies, from doing it. So what happens in HODL UP is the players are the network. They're the ones that are going to track all the players together are going to look at where the Bitcoin is. So it is a network agreement. So money can only move between the players when everybody agrees that that's what it's supposed to do. There's an interesting idea called the 51% attack where someone could theoretically try to take over, but it is something that will lead to a hard fork change if someone were to try it. Energy wise, it's not realistic. So what you have is basically an unstoppable network now, and it is completely decentralized. And in the game, you have 6 players, no bank. All right, we've been talking in general about banks and no banks, but to make this more clear, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to follow a transaction in this world, and we're going to follow a transaction in this world. So in Monopoly, just to bring it to today's world where most money is flowing digitally, you might tap your phone, you might swipe your card, you might just do it online, but you're probably doing most of your transactions digitally. So let's say we have 2 players, you have Alice and Bob, and Bob wants to buy something from Alice. So in a game, maybe it's a railroad. In real life, maybe she runs a coffee shop. So Alice then swipes Bob's card. So what actually happens now? So here's what's going on behind the scenes. Alice will have a point of sale system, and it's going to connect to a gateway processor. This might be something like a Square, a Stripe, or a PayPal. You probably don't even know what it is. Most people don't have a need to know that. Anyway, so this payment processor is going to take the customer's information, and it's going to go to Alice's bank. Okay, so now we got Alice, Bob, we got a gateway, and we got a bank. Alice's bank, the merchant bank, is going to then turn to yet another player, and that's the payment processor. So think Visa, MasterCard, American Express, or who am I missing? Discover. So the payment processor is now involved, and they're going to talk to yet another player, which is Bob's bank. Wow, okay, we got a lot of players in here now. So Bob's bank is going to have to check his ledger, Bob's ledger, to see if he has the funds or not. And then they're going to have to update Bob's ledger and then kind of go back to the payment processor who's going to update Alice's bank. And so this is the process. And along the way, everybody wants a piece of the pie. So the payment processor, the gateway, and both the banks in this example are all going to have something. There are interchange fees, there are assessment fees, there are processing fees, there are gateway fees. You have all these fees. And so if you're Alice, let's say you're running a shop, and this is about 4%. If your cost of delivering that cup of coffee, a haircut, or a railroad in the game is 4% higher, you're just going to charge that onto your customers because it's a real expense. So if you are ever wondering why you would go to some places like a restaurant or any other store and they took cash and they would charge less for cash, the reason is all this behind the scene fees. That's what's going on in the fiat world. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to do a transaction in HODL UP. And just like real Bitcoin, because there's no banks, you basically are doing transactions from peer to peer. So in the case of the game, you're going from one color wallet to another color wallet. It goes directly from one player's wallet to the other without going through anything else. And that's what happens in real life. There is no bank to go through. It literally goes from one player's wallet to another player's wallet. And so in the game, we represent that with these little player cards, the 6 player cards, and collectively those 6 cards are the distributed ledger. Everyone sees them, everyone uses them, and they are the decentralized ledger. All the Bitcoin is going to start here in the beginning of the game, and it's going to end up there at the end of the game on somebody's wallet. Okay, so let's do a transaction. So let's say it's the beginning of the game, and it's Yellow's turn. Yellow's going to go first. So Yellow is trying to get a transaction. That's what they're going to try to add to the blockchain, and it says that green sends 1 to red. Okay, so let's say this player, she is successful in mining this, and that transaction is being added to the time chain. What happens is peer to peer, green is going to send one token to red and physically moves over one of the tokens. And this is how Bitcoin really works. Someone will share their address, maybe a QR code or a text. The sender signs it, and that's basically the approval. And the transaction is then sent off for the miners to mine. The miner, in this case the yellow player, will build up all these transactions. And once they're successfully added to the block, that Bitcoin is now in somebody else's wallet. And everybody who is running a Bitcoin node, think about over 10,000 machines right now where people are running Bitcoin node voluntarily. They will update each other and say, here is the next valid block. And in this block, green sent one to red. So you can't double spend it. You can't do anything else because now it is in red's wallet. So in this way, the game is representing the transaction. Again, no banks. It went from green to red without any other involvement. For today, what I want to do is just wrap it all up with the way we started off. In HODL UP, this represents a world that is decentralized. There is no bankers. The players are the network. And if someone gets up to leave the game for whatever reason, they come back later, they just pick up wherever they left off. The game goes on. Whereas in the fiat world, this is centralized. You have to have a banker. Somebody has to play the banker or the game is paralyzed. And they're involved in almost all the transactions. If you want to buy a property, if you pass go, if you have to pay your taxes, whatever it is. And also, as we talked about with Big Brother helping out his friends in our example, if the banker decides to loan people or give them money or help out their friend or write IOUs and never run out of money, they can do other stuff too. But it's a very different world. So I'll just leave it with this. When you play these games, just think about the ideas that they represent. This is a peer-to-peer, no bank, decentralized model with HODL UP. This is a very centralized, very dependent on a central banker type of model. And you could not have two more different perspectives on how you would design money. So there you go. To bank or not to bank.